Hola, good morning. It is Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. I'm Nicole. This is the Trust Effect, and I'm so happy you're here. Few minutes late today because the landscaping gods decided to work in my favor, and the lawn crew finished up at exactly 8:58 this morning. So I had 2 minutes to spare, and if any of y'all are on Substack, let me know if you also have issues getting live streams started, because I feel like from the moment I hit go live to when it actually pops up, I'm always looking this way because I have it on my laptop. It takes like 5 minutes for it to actually appear. So it's hard to time whether or not when you're starting, if you've actually started and if things are getting cut out. So anyway, I digress. But good morning. I'm so happy you're here. And I have a lot to cover today because I feel like, as you all know, if you're tuning in on a regular basis, I'm in Nova Scotia, specifically Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And we've had a very active news cycle in the last week. But I think my favorite part about the news cycle right now is how closely it's tying into sovereign wealth, field literacy, the work that I do. And it shouldn't be a shock to me because the entire premise of my work and field literacy is to show very, very clearly that there is only one field, that there is only one, I don't want to say reality because we all experience reality differently, but there really is only one field. I don't know what other word to use, that is working interdependently all the time, right? And because we live in a very fragmented, allopathic minded world where we're going to look at one thing and try and fix that. And then when we run into issues and we get the side effects of what we're working on there, we're going to go now try and fix it with something else. It's kind of like, what do they call it? Prescription stacking. So you go in for one issue, you are given a prescription, and then you have a side effect, and then you're given another prescription for the side effect, and another, and another, and another. And it becomes this cascading effect. And so the entire premise of my work is to go, we need to look at everything holistically. Everything is integrated and operating interdependently and symbiotically at all times. And until we can recognize that, nothing's really going to change. We're just going to keep playing whack-a-mole with all the symptoms. And so before I jump into everything today, I want to start with the daily sovereign passage. So while today may be June 30th, 2026, according to the Daily Sovereign, which is a seasonal devotional, which means we're not working on the Gregorian calendar. We're working either with the physical seasons, the seasons of your life, but according to the physical seasons in Nova Scotia right now, it is summer, week 2, day 3, page 105. And today's passage is inner weather. There are days when your inner life changes before your thoughts do. You wake and something already feels different. The air inside you is heavier or brighter or more charged than it was the day before. Nothing dramatic may have happened, yet your whole way of meeting the morning has somehow changed shape. And this isn't always a message. Sometimes it's simply weather moving through, but even weather deserves to be felt before it's named incorrectly. If you rush too quickly to decide why you feel what you feel, you can end up fastening old meanings onto passing conditions. Then what might have moved through cleanly becomes a story you now have to carry. There is gentleness in letting sensation arrive before interpretation claims it. A tight chest doesn't always mean danger. Restlessness does not always mean something's wrong. Lightness doesn't always need a plan. Let the body speak in its first language before you ask it to translate. And because I wrote the Daily Sovereign as a way of helping you connect more deeply to your inner witness, the whole purpose of this book is just to allow you to pay attention to perhaps what's coming up for you and to pay attention to how you're meeting your day and how you're meeting your reality and the things that may appear for you. Because our participation, what we do with our time, attention, and energy, um, is often met unconsciously, right? We move habitually through our world. We move through in autopilot. And so it becomes really important to learn how to start witnessing. Because when you start witnessing, you start realizing that nothing's actually happening in isolation, right? The way we meet our work is the way we meet our relationships, is the way we meet our community, is the way we meet our health. You know, you'll often hear people say how you do one thing is how you do all things. And so the purpose of the witness for me is so that you can take a beat and you can step back and from a more neutral perspective, not approaching it from the position of the villain, victim, hero, be able to kind of witness how things are unfolding in your life and how you are actually meeting them. It's kind of like having this out of body experience where you're just kind of up above looking at everything happening. And so what I wanted to do today was I wanted to, sorry, I'm just distracted by my screen here. I wanted to start with a few definitions because I've noticed in looking back through my other live streams that I'm speaking from my level of awareness and my level of understanding, and I might not always be meeting the people who are tuning in where they're at. And so before we jump into today, and we look at some of the headlines in Nova Scotia and how it ties into the work, I wanted to talk a little bit about field literacy, which is how I describe the fluency that begins to take shape and take form as you step into the witness, as you learn how to read these fields, as you start to learn that not everything is independent and that it actually connects. Because we're going to start talking about an expense scandal and we're going to move deep into taxonomy and then how that actually works in our own life. And on the surface, it sounds really, really different, but it's not, right? I spent a lot of time last week on the radio talking about participation and how we as individuals show up and participate in our civic systems and with our governments, and how, you know, when you point a finger out, you have three pointing back, and that we, in that 3-to-1 ratio of responsibility, we're not showing up responsibly. We're not taking accountability. We've offloaded so much and outsourced so much onto a fundamentally broken government structure that it's so out of balance and so out of alignment right now and so lopsided that the wheels are coming off the bus. And the only way we get everything back on track is to show up differently, to participate differently, to learn how to read the field, to understand that what's happening in your inner world is being pushed out and reflected back to you through your governments, right? If we don't have that base awareness, if we don't start really understanding the impact that we have on our everyday life, nothing's going to change. It's going to get worse. And there's a quote that floats around, and many of you have probably heard it. And I'm going to say the quote, but I'm not speaking about men. I'm talking about humans. I'm talking about everyone. But it's that strong men make good times create weak men create hard times. And we're in hard times right now. And it's because people are weak in character, in integrity, in morals, in ethics, in participation. And the culmination of that is showing up in all of our external systems. And until we get control of our internal system, nothing's going to change outside of us, right? So this is where it's very symbiotic, where you use the outside world around you to reflect on your inner world, and then you make the changes in your inner world and the micro adjustments in your inner world so that your outer world can begin to change. We don't just flip a switch. So, because I am working inside of my own framework, one of the books that I wrote is the Sovereign Wealth Keys. And the intention of the Sovereign Wealth Keys was to add language and structure and visuals to this ecosystem that I've created so that you can start having touchstones and a deeper understanding of what I'm talking about. And so field literacy, there I go, field literacy, which is on page 166 of the keys. Field literacy is the ability to read structure directly. It interprets patterns of capacity, function, governance, and continuity without distortion from identity or emotion. Again, capacity, function, governance, and continuity being the 4 conditions of trust that I talk about 100% of the time. Field literacy is perception trained by law. It shifts awareness from interpreting stories to recognizing structure. So how roles, contracts, and energies are positioned and how they begin to interact with each other. It reveals coherence and collapse without personalizing either, right? Because we're looking at patterns. We're not looking at personalities. We're not looking at people. We're looking at the pattern below, right? We're never condemning the human. We're looking at the patterns that they're operating through. Through field literacy, perception organizes itself around pattern instead of emotion, because emotions are ultimately patterns. It becomes possible to see how capacity, jurisdiction, and contract determine movement in any exchange. So who are you? Where are you standing? What are the agreements between the two of you that bind you to that place? And what are the patterns that are showing up there? This clarity makes responsibility traceable and turns confusion into navigation. So now you start to build yourself a map, right? You start to understand when you learn how to read the field, how you should move, right? Field literacy converts awareness into participation. So it's one thing to watch the news, watch social media, read all the documents, but then you end up in analysis paralysis, right? So how do we then move out of I know it here to I know it here? And once I know it here, that is now going to direct my steps and it's going to direct my action. It's going to direct my participation. The field becomes readable, correction becomes possible, and narratives stop substituting for what structure already shows. So that is, do words and actions align? Is what you say and what you do congruent? Right? Don't talk about it, be about it. And people, you heard this when you were a little kid, actions speak louder than words. They do. So we have to start paying more attention to the action, to the silence, to the things that are unspoken, and reading the actual outcomes of what is showing up all of the time. And then looking at the results of actions and going, okay, what do we actually have? Because in a world where self-accountability and self-responsibility is so low, we've become more concerned with how something looks and how something sounds than how it's actually working. And you can see that in all facets of life. I think the most prominent place we see it would be in social media. We're seeing a wave right now, and I think Gen Z is so interesting for this, right? They're really the first generation to only know the internet. As an elder millennial, zennial, if you will, I've had the privilege of growing up in both, right? Managed to get through university without social media, thank God. But in the zennial, or not the zennial, sorry, in the Gen Z generation, what I find so interesting is that they are more concerned with how things look than how they feel and how they function, and through no fault of their own. I mean, eventually you get to an age where you do become accountable and responsible for changing those perceptions. But you just have to look at the rate of plastic surgery. You have to look at the fact that when you see someone online and meet them in person, they don't look the same. That they are more apt to be romanced by words than by actions. And it's creating a significant burden on their body, on their spirit, on their mental health. And they're a really interesting case study for me. And that's why I think Gen Alpha is even more interesting, because they're looking at the world going, this is a dumpster fire. Like, why do I want to participate in anything? Like, they're looking around seeing how unhappy adults are and wondering why they should follow in our footsteps. And I don't blame them. I'm doing the same thing. So this is why I'm really passionate about integrating everything we're seeing and being able to look at it holistically and as a whole, to begin to understand how one thing affects the other, right? So when I talk about field literacy, I'm also talking about my 9 fields. And I really need to get like a little sign, but for now we're just going to use the book, right? But these are the 9 fields, and they work like this. They're like a compass. Those are the 9 fields of your life. And so field literacy is going, okay, there's something happening here, but it's absolutely going to have an impact here and here and here and here if I'm not paying attention to how those areas are showing up in my life. I'm not paying attention, right? And so to dive into Nova Scotia and what I am deeply interested in, and this all just happened yesterday too. Well, it didn't happen yesterday. Last week I was speaking about a new headline that had dropped in Nova Scotia, specifically in the Halifax Regional Municipality, concerning our mayor, and the fact that our mayor had his expenses audited by the HRM auditor, and there were irregularities found that were serious enough that the auditor went, we know this happened, which is there was a speechwriter in an office reorganization. There was a speechwriting contract and an office reorganization plan that, according to HRM procurement rules, should have gone out for tender and didn't. And there were 2 legal expenses attached to code of conduct complaints that he was part of, that, according to the rules and regulation of the HRM, if a member of council or the mayor is under code of conduct, that those legal expenses are to be absorbed personally. And yet they were submitted back to the HRM for payment. Now, and those are facts. Like, this has been shown by the auditor. Like, those things are not up for debate, and even the mayor has said this happened. Now, he has since gone back and paid out of his own pocket the expenses. They've been paid back, but it was referred to first the Halifax Regional Police, and then onto the RCMP for investigation to see if there was any criminal wrongdoing. And I find that very interesting. But yesterday, the mayor went on the radio for about 15 minutes to explain his position and what he's looking at. And there were a few things that he said that I found very interesting, and from a field literacy standpoint, made me go, oh, mayor, say more. Because I'm very interested in what he was saying. So the first thing he said was I just want to be clear that people are not under investigation right now. It's the policies and the procedures that are being reviewed by the RCMP. And I thought that was really interesting. And the reason I find that interesting is that there's no such thing as like a governance fairy. The policies and procedures didn't just magically appear and fall out of the sky, right? And I wrote, if you go into my Substack, I have an entire section called Field Literacy. And well over a year ago, maybe closer to 2, I did what I called the Field Literacy Activation Series. And I wanted to go through all of the different facets of life where we are treating the symptoms, whether it's our mental health, our relationships, our family systems, our governments, our financial systems. Um, we treat them independently, but they're always operating symbiotically. And I have an article, I'm just trying to pull it up here, in the activation series called, I didn't write it down, Consent as Collateral. And the intention of that article, it goes over law, finance, and governments run on permission. And when that permission stops being mutual, collapse begins. And ultimately, what I'm talking about is the HRM is a corporation, right? There's a reason we have corporate governance. There's a reason we have bylaws. It's a corporation. And corporations are inherently legal fictions. They're pieces of paper. And those pieces of paper, those corporations, only become alive and are animated through the participation of the humans inside of it. And so what also came out simultaneously, I actually came out on the back of the, it came out on the back of the investigation into the mayor, is another report onto the capital budget for the HRM. And what they found in the capital budget is that there is no way to trace, there's no way to trace the decisions on how spending for approximately $380 million was made. What were the decisions? How were they made? We can't trace the decisions. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem. And I'm going to tie this all together in a minute. But what I really want to kind of stress first is when it comes to the government, I'm going to read you something here. When it comes to the government, we have to remember it is a legal fiction. It is a piece of paper that are animated by humans. So ultimately, there are humans that are in there writing the documents, handing them out, giving people their marching orders, and then it's being executed. And sometimes those marching orders are actually through assumption and not necessarily through what's written down on the page in black and white. And assumption, which is in this book, are really important because we actually live our life through assumptions 99% of the time. And so in the world of field literacy, assumption is one of the mechanics of trust, right? So assumption is movement made without verification. It replaces observation with belief and bypasses capacity, jurisdiction, or contract. Assumption collapses once truth is witnessed. So assumption is an action ahead of truth. It occurs when the system moves without verifying standing. So what was the capacity of the people that were moving? What was their jurisdiction? And what were the contracts that bound them to that? This creates motion without authority and consequence without coherence. And the result is distortion presented as certainty. That's what we're seeing in the HRM audit right now. We are seeing that people potentially were acting outside of their capacity and their jurisdiction to make decisions, to sign contracts, to spend money on assumptions. And we can't even trace the logic behind what they were doing because none of it's recorded. That's a problem. Field literacy names assumption as the gap between perception and proof. In this gap, the mind substitutes story for structure, and the field responds with friction because movement is occurring outside jurisdiction. Friction is not correction, it's the signal that correction is required. So assumption dissolves when witness returns, and truth does not need defense, it just needs recognition. And when perception aligns with what's real, standing becomes clear. I know your capacity, I know where you're standing, I know your jurisdiction. Authority restores itself, so I am now able to trace responsibility to the responsible party, and motion becomes coherent again, which means we are moving in the right direction. We don't have that right now. So with the HRM, it's really important to remember, again, that it is a legal fiction. And so I'm just going to read you a little part here from my article on consent is not collateral. And it's called, the section's The Myth of Financial Personhood. So a corporation cannot have integrity and a contract cannot be alive. Yet we talk about them as if they can. We say what the market believes, the law decides, the system protects, and these phrases turn human judgment into mechanical inevitability, and they let people hide behind processes and call the outcomes neutral. This is the myth of financial personhood, the idea that a legal entity can hold conscience. It's a convenient fiction that removes accountability from those who act in its name. Banks decline, governments require, insurers deny. Each decision sounds administrative, but is carried out by people who have chosen to obey the form, the piece of paper, instead of the truth. And a legal entity can hold property, impose fees, and enforce penalties, but it cannot discern right from wrong. It cannot recognize harm or extend grace. And the moment people surrender moral judgment to the system that represents them, the structure loses its living core and the form keeps moving, but no one is actually steering. So to bring this back to what the mayor said, which was, it's not the people that are being investigated, it's the documents. Someone wrote the documents, someone approved the documents, someone put them into circulation, and then other people are acting on them. They didn't just get dropped in by a governance fairy, okay? Now, the most fascinating part of the conversation from the mayor yesterday, and the one thing he said that I thought just tickled my brain, had to do with when he said, I'm getting into the weeds when I say this, and your listeners don't really need to be in the weeds, but when I submit expenses, he was trying to explain the expense issue. When I submit expenses, we have to go into a portal. And in the portal, there's a drop down menu. And they give you all the things you can classify an expense under. And because there was nothing there for legal, my staff classified it under other. And the moment I heard that, my brain exploded. And this is why. So if you've been kicking around for a minute, you know that I used to work for one of the largest law firms in Atlantic Canada. And I also, from there, was hired to work for one of the world's leading offshore legal fund and fiduciary firms. And in both of those spaces, I worked predominantly in workflow, process, governance, and data and document management. Okay. When I was at the law firm, we had some billing issues. And when I say we had some billing issues, the issues that we were having, every time you do something in a law firm, if you've ever received a legal bill, you probably see bills on your bill. You see accountings for phone calls, you see it for photocopies, you might see it for courier charges. And it's because everything must be billed back to what is known as a matter, right? So every time you go in contract with a lawyer, they open a matter number in your name. Same in the financial world. Every entity has what's known as a matter number. And so if you're going to have a bunch of documents copied, all of the photocopies have, all the photocopiers have, I can't remember what they're called, machines attached to them. And you have to put in your employee number and the matter code so that everything, so say it's 10 cents a copy, gets billed back to that client, right? Everything is tracked. But the firm had a general matter number. And when my boss came in, who eventually is the one that brought me offshore, she looked at the general matter number and went, why are these costs off the rails? The amount of work, photocopies, couriers, supplies, being billed to the general matter number didn't make sense. We couldn't figure out where those costs were supposed to go. And when those costs can't go anywhere, they have to get absorbed by the organization, which means they're coming off the bottom lines, the partners aren't happy, and ultimately that starts to result in higher legal fees that get pushed back to the client. And so one of the first things she did was lock down that matter number. Only specific people, so you had to put in your employee code first. And if your employee code didn't have the permissions, you couldn't use the general matter number. So that got locked down. So that was forcing people to go, oh, okay, I have to make sure I know my client matter number to put it in. I have to have that if I want my courier to go out. So we had to start redirecting and retraining staff to go, you need to do the proper financial allocations for your client work. And also, every employee had a matter number, meaning the firm wasn't saying if you need to send something for courier or if you want to order supplies because we get a really good deal or you need to photocopy something, absolutely, you can do that. No problem. Because at one point we actually had to lock the supply closet, put a lock on it because in August, everyone's down there school supply shopping for their kids. And so the costs were off the rails. But everyone had their own matter number. So they could absolutely put in their matter number, do their photocopies, send their couriers, get the rates that the firm was getting, but ultimately you were going to get a bill from the finance department to pay for it. And so it was during that process where I was also transitioning into building a knowledge base. So it was legal precedents and internal documents. It was our governance structure. It's where every employee, we had 6 offices regionally. So where was the one consolidated place everyone could go to know what it was that they had to do? I was building that. And when you're building out systems like that, you have to create what's known as a taxonomy structure, right? So those are the buckets that everything fits in. And the natural inclination when you don't know where something goes is that you label it as other or general or miscellaneous. But guess what? Other, general, and miscellaneous don't actually exist. There's no such thing as other, general, or miscellaneous. That is the equivalent of having a junk drawer on your ledger. And so I had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where everything went, what the taxonomy was going to be, working with the partners, working with the stakeholders, working with my team to try and figure out what is our taxonomy structure that everyone's going to live and die from. Because when you have knowledge base, when you have precedent, the reason firms and corporations that are very successful invest so much money into that infrastructure is because minutes matter, right? Time is money. And if you want to have an edge on anyone else, you have to know what you're looking for and that you can reliably get it 100% of the time. And when you start getting into knowledge and precedent databases, garbage in means garbage out. So if you're putting things in and a lawyer's pulling it for a case and it's unreliable because it wasn't tagged properly, you have a problem, right? So then when I moved offshore, it was the same thing. So now I'm responsible for building out, we were first to market globally with a project and a product in the private equity world that centralized the corporate administration for private equity firms, for 12-figure firms. Those are firms that are holding somewhere between 100 billion and 999 billion dollars in assets under management. That's a lot of money, right? Um, and they're not fucking around. So, what became really interesting for me during that process was, again, there's no such thing as other, general, or miscellaneous. If you have documents, if you have entities, if you have paperwork, and you don't know where it goes, it doesn't go into other. It goes into a pipeline for needs review to make sure it goes to the people who are making those decisions to know where it's supposed to go, because time is money. And the reason people have these edges, the reason billion-dollar companies are billion-dollar companies is because they have dashboards like the one that we created that they can reliably go to at a high level, look at the informations that they need, and make a fast decision, right? This is why time is money. It's all about how quickly you can make a high-level, reliable decision in your life. So when the mayor says we didn't see legal, so we applied it and submitted it under other, my immediate thought was, why the hell is there even another option? That shouldn't actually exist. Somewhere, someone made a governance decision to include other in the taxonomy, i.e., the drop down menu, for people to be able to submit expenses that way. So now, where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm not just looking at the mayor. I want an audit on that other expense feature. I want an audit on why it exists, who made that decision, what is actually being billed there, because we're watching a lot of counselors and staff's been pretty quiet, but council, it's a shit show. Counselors are pointing fingers and trying to create scandal, going, what's in there? Well, sir, what have you been expensing as other? I'm curious about that because there's no such thing as other. And I think, again, considering it's the junk drawer of a ledger, I want to know what's in there. I want to know if that other expenses is as off the rails as what I witnessed inside of a law firm. Something tells me it is, right? And because when you get into the financial world or you get into business operations, most people will say, oh, yeah, it's normal. And it may have been normalized, but I have seen firsthand in my own experience that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be there. Somewhere there's someone going, I don't know what to do with something, so I'm just going to put it in the junk drawer. And when we're talking about municipal budgets, we have a problem. So let's extrapolate that further. We now have a governance issue that's been illuminated by the Auditor General around our capital budget, where there's $380 million of spending that's unaccounted. There's no way to know how the decisions were made for that $380,000 or $380 million. That's a governance issue. Somewhere that's falling into the other bucket. And no one's looking at that right now. I'm going to be raising that today publicly. But no one's looking at that. And it's really, really important. We need to know. And that's the audit that I'm most interested in. This is just illuminating that we have a problem. But you can see how it starts to spiral. And so, how does this all tie into sovereign wealth? Well, friends, the whole reason I created sovereign wealth, the whole reason I created the 9 fields is because my data management, document management brain went, well, if companies and firms and financial companies or like private equity firms are as successful as they are because they understand not only their structure, but they have a very clear taxonomy and buckets in their business to know what belongs where, what influences each other, and how that impacts the overall health of their organization so that they can make really fast decisions. Well, at the human level, what do we have? Because last time I checked, we're carrying all of our trauma, all of our emotions, all of our thoughts in our body, like in this invisible backpack. And we don't know what belongs where. We don't know what's influencing each other. And what do we do about it? And then I had to look at the world, and I was very interested in sovereign wealth funds because these sovereign wealth funds are created to look at our infrastructure, at our healthcare, at our housing, at our natural resources, and they're looking at all of that as an investment portfolio. But at the end of the day, that investment portfolio and the value of that portfolio is only valuable based on our sweat equity, right? Again, legal fiction. A sovereign wealth fund is a legal fiction. It's just a piece of paper, it's a map, it's a diagram. But unless we have people actively signing the contracts, doing the job, showing up every day and participating to make that thing a reality, it doesn't exist. It's just an idea on a piece of paper. And so, what is the value of your sweat equity that is making something like a sovereign wealth fund, which is external of you, valuable? And if you don't know your own value, you are going to leak it everywhere. If you can't identify the value in your own life, you're going to leak it everywhere. So that's why I created, like I said, the 9 fields. So that's your taxonomy. That's your personal taxonomy, right? You have things that sit in your physical field. You have things that sit in your emotional field, your intellectual field, your creative field, your, where are we? Creative field, your connections, your relationships. You have the environment that you inhabit every day. You have your purpose, your vocation, what lights you up. You have the resources, your material, tangible assets. And then you have your faith, spirituality, that greater unseen belief structure that shapes your world. That is your personal taxonomy. What lives in those buckets? And I'm not here to tell you what belongs there. It's not my job, right? But you have already lived a life to this point, however old you are, where you've just been accumulating information in each of those spaces. And we have to figure out how to start putting it in there, right? So just like I said with the mayor, there's no such thing as other. So the fact that he can go into an expense portal and look at a list of areas to expense something and go, I don't actually know where it fits, so I'm just going to throw it in other, again, which is the equivalent of a junk drawer on a ledger, because you can't trace that expense back. Actually, you can trace it back. Someone's choosing not to. Someone's choosing not to figure out where it goes. Same reason you have a junk drawer in your kitchen. You know where the thing in your hand should go, but the drawer is more convenient, so you drop it there. And then it accumulates and it overflows. And then at one point you either have to deal with it or you just keep jamming the drawer shut. And then you lose things in there. And then when you do kind of go clean it out, you're like, I didn't know that was there. Well, we're the same way, right? An emotion that gets bypassed, a physical ailment that doesn't get addressed, a relationship that's unhealthy, something in your environment that's toxic, not looking at your bank account, not examining your beliefs. It doesn't mean it doesn't go anywhere, because there's no such thing as other, general, or miscellaneous. It sits there and it festers and it impacts everything else. And if you're not paying attention to how that's operating, you're going to misclassify it, and you're actually going to think that the issues in your life are coming from other things than where it actually belongs, right? Everything is data. This is why I'm such a nerd. I find this stuff fascinating. And it's, again, this is field literacy. This is, how do I see what's happening outside of me? And the whippersnipper's coming now. Get rid of this lawnmower. It's how do I look at everything that's happening in my life and actually get to the root cause of it. Because whatever shakes out with the mayor and what's happening with this expense scandal, at the end of the day, no one in that office should have had the ability to expense something as other. The fact that that exists in the portal, that is an expense option, is inherently a problem. Let's look at that. Let's look at the governance decisions that were made to make that available so that someone can self-identify something as other without it going into a pipeline for review so that it gets allocated to the appropriate states. That is the issue. Again, with us as individuals, if I have a physical ailment, I'm going to use myself as an example. When I was going through burnout in 2017, before I left my job, I absolutely was basically crippled from pain. There were mornings, it was like 5:30 in the morning, and I'd be crawling on my hands and my knees to the bathroom because I couldn't stand up. I couldn't put any weight on my right leg because my sciatic nerve was shot. And I would go to chiropractors, I would go to physio, they'd be working on my physical body, they'd be trying to loosen it. I would get temporary relief and then it would go out again. Well, then, when I didn't know what else to do, and I'm relatively pharmaceutically averse, like, what else am I going to do? I started doing deep research. And then that's when I started learning. I think that's when I came across Dr. Bessel van der Kolk in the book, The Body Keeps Score. And that's when I entered the world of somatics. And I was like, what do you mean emotions live in my body? What do you mean things that I'm not dealing with as a highly avoidant person? What do you mean the things I'm not dealing with are causing physical ailments? Tell me more. I'm curious. You have my attention, doctor. And that's when I started learning about the symptom of my back and that my back pain was actually emotional and that it had to do with the stresses that I was carrying. And it wasn't just from my job, it was from my childhood. I could map it all the way back. And lo and behold, as I started dealing with that, transmuting it, paying attention that what was happening in my physical field was actually a symptom of what was happening in my emotional field, which was actually connected to the relationships in my life and the fact that I wasn't living my vocation and the fact that I wasn't expressing myself intellectually and the fact that I may have figured out for the first time in my life the financial aspect, my resources. I finally felt materially stable. You know, I had a very well paying 6-figure job. I was materially stable. I figured that out, but everything else was a dumpster fire and it was showing up in my body. I couldn't walk. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And I had to understand how that all connected. And so the reason I say this is this maps back to the expense. There's no such thing as other. There's no such thing as general. There's no such thing as miscellaneous, because in the world of physics, what is it? Newton's fourth law? Energy in motion is always in motion, which means once something has been created, it's always going to live there. And the only thing you can do is either transform or transmute it into something different, right? This is the alchemy of life. You have to know that something can always change state and change form, but not without your attention and not without your participation. So I had to start looking at those emotions. Had to start dealing with them. I had to figure out how to integrate them into my life instead of avoiding them, to start resolving the gut issues, the back issues, the skin issues, the weight issues. Because there's no such thing as other. There's no such thing as general. There's no such thing as miscellaneous. There's no such thing as garbage. That's another one. Let that tickle your brain. And so we're in a constant state of transmutation, transformation, and alchemy. Always. In order to get to the root of the symptoms. If you want something to be better, If you want something to improve, you have to be willing to get to the root of the issue. And at that root of the issue is also trust, right? This is why trust is a structure. This is why trust is ultimately what I'm always going to come back to, because trust in self becomes the trust that shows up in the world around you. I had to know my capacity. What could I reasonably carry? What was I carrying that was mine? What was I carrying that was not mine? Because all those emotions that were in my body, most of it wasn't mine. It wasn't my shit to hold on to. I had to figure out how to release it, right? Function. What is all of this serving in my life? My governance. What are the morals, ethics, integrity, rules that I've set for myself that I'm living by? What am I valuing? And how is what I'm valuing writing the contracts in my life? Like, what are those? And once I could get really clear on that, can I operate it continuously over time? Right? But even when you're not clear, right? And this is the whole like mind fuck of it all, is even when you're not clear, you're still operating continuously over time inside of your capacity, function, and governance. So if this is a mess, it's operating continuously, whether you want to look at it or not. And it's only once you choose to look at it that you can take responsibility for it and change how you want to participate with it. And this is why there is no victim, there is no villain, there is no hero, there's only the witness. You can only witness how you're assigning those rules to the people, places, and things in your life, because that shows you how you're participating with it. Are you participating with it from the position of a villain, from a victim? Are you trying to be a hero? All of those things have consequences, but you get to determine what that participation looks like and what results and fruit it bears, right? There's like a Bible verse. What is it? Like, know the tree by its fruit. Know the tree by its fruit. What fruit are you producing? I have an article on that somewhere on there, right? There was a quote by Marianne Williamson. Oh, I hate that I keep thinking of these quotes in real time and then I can't remember what they are. It's a beautiful quote, and whatever you are not giving, only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation. Only what you are not giving can be lacking in any situation. What are you not doing? What are you not participating in? Again, pointing your finger, 3 back, 3-to-1 ratio of responsibility. So this is what I find so interesting about my work, not just because I've created it, and not just because I've put my entire being and life into this. It's because I'm not able to move through this world in a fragmented way. I'm not able to move through this world and know that my physical health isn't going to have an impact on my community, that my emotional health is not going to have an impact on my family, that how I choose to show up and participate every day in my vocation doesn't have an impact on the society that I'm participating in and the government structures. They're all interconnected. And when I was speaking on the radio last week, I think it was last Friday, usually I call in to talk about something specifically that's happening. But I did spend the majority of last week on air talking about how we have a comprehension issue, we have a governance issue. It keeps showing up repeatedly in audit reports. The audit reports consistently, whether you're looking at them at the municipal level, or the provincial level, or the federal level, are showing no one knows who they are. They don't know what they're responsible for. The documentation is insufficient. Everyone's running on poor assumptions. The wheels have come off the bus, and there's no way to track and trace where something goes. I reject the fact that there's nowhere to track and trace where something goes. As I said at the beginning of this live, The law firm, we had to lock it all down. We had to lock down the general matter code. We had to lock the storage closet. We had to make sure that every single person was properly accounting for what they were responsible for. And it's so poetic to me because that was at a very mechanical level. It's like, you have an employee code, you have a matter number. If you're not putting your photocopies, if you're not putting your courier, if you're not putting your supplies, if you're not putting the day-to-day things that are responsible for that matter on that matter, you're going to be held responsible for it. There is no more general code. That general code cannot be so overinflated that the firm is now going to absorb the costs of people not doing what they're supposed to do. Everyone knew. It was very clear. We had the rules, we had the regulations, so then we had to make sure that they were enforced. So we've given it to you, we've put it in writing, we've told you what it is, and now we're going to enforce it. And if you don't want to play by those rules, then there's the door. You are free to leave. But what you're not going to do is take your financial burdens and put them on everyone else. We're just not going to do that. It doesn't serve anybody, right? Same thing when I go offshore. When we're looking at the documents, do you know how quickly we would have been fired by our clients if we were misfiling documents? If we were not able to keep their structure chart clear in our system? Because if we didn't know where something went, instead of asking the question and putting it in for review, we filed it as other, they would have fired us, because the entire purpose of what we built was to streamline these processes so they could make decisions at a high level faster. That is why one of my clients went from like 100 billion in assets under management to 300 inside of 5 years, because structurally they were so much more efficient and they weren't getting garbage inside of their systems every time they went looking for something. It was where it was supposed to be, right? We are the same way. So as I said, with that sovereign wealth wheel, yeah, I was having that back issue. Yeah, I could attribute it to my physical pain, like my physical body, but it wasn't my back. It was all of the emotional debris that I was holding on to that were created by my assumptions about my own self-worth based on how I was supporting myself, how I grew up, the relationships that I had, the environments that I was putting myself in. That was creating an emotional load, which was expressing itself through my body. When we look at our governments, we have bad governance, we have people that are not looking, we have people that are not asking questions. They're not reading the documents, if the documents even exist. We, the taxpayers, the population, are bearing the brunt of this maladministration, and then we're whacking away at the symptoms. We're complaining about potholes, we're complaining about city planning, we're complaining about development. But those structures, those physical structures, will never, ever, ever improve if the underlying foundational structures, which is, does everybody know who they are, their capacity, are they functioning as expected? Do they have the rules and regulations in place to do that? And are they doing it continuously over time? If that's not happening, nothing gets better. And being field literate, becoming fluent in field literacy, means you are no longer looking at your government, at your family, at the environment, at yourself, at your pets as separate. They are all expressions of the same thing. And the more you can expand your perspective and your perception of what's happening, it gets a lot easier, right? Then your brain is not swirling and scattering in a million different places, trying to manage a bunch of different threats and risks and inefficiencies, because you're like, oh, inside out, outside in, this tracks, this makes sense. I can make a quick decision for this. I can get this back on track quickly. because I'm not chasing my tail around all of the symptoms. It's powerful work. And I'm not just tooting my own horn. This is powerful, powerful, powerful work. And the more I have these, the more I have these conversations publicly, what I find so fascinating is I'm always calling into the radio, and I get some slack for it. I read online. I see what people are saying about me. I think I think the favorite thing that I've seen so far on Reddit is the thought process of someone going, "This woman really needs a hobby," to, "Oh, I think this might be her hobby," to, "Whoa, she makes a lot of sense. Whoa, I wish she would run for city council. Whoa." Like, it's been this really interesting progression of how people are perceiving me because I'm able to talk about anything. I mean, anything. And always bring it back to self accountability and self responsibility and make it make sense. To show that the lack of civic participation, the fact that as a taxpayer you expect because you pay taxes for something that someone else is responsible for it, it's just not the case. It's not the case. It's just like going to the doctor because you have a tummy ache and them giving you a medication, and then you end up in a cascading effect of, well, I had a tummy ache and then now I have a headache. So now I have medication for my stomach. I have medication for my head. Now I'm having some muscle spasms. So I'm going to get, and then all you're doing is playing whack-a-mole with symptoms. And maybe you had an issue with your diet. Maybe your amino acids, your mineral complex, your vitamins are out of balance in your body, so you have a leaky gut. And you got to fix that. Or even more than that, maybe you're stressed and the stress is manifesting in the gut biome, in the microbiome of your gut. And instead of dealing with the stress, because perhaps your relationships aren't stable, your money's not stable, um, you're not living into your purpose, you're operating out of integrity more times than not, instead of addressing that, which is creating the stress in your gut, you're just going to start throwing all of these other things at it. Never fixes the issue. Like, this is deep root cause analysis. Deep root cause analysis. And I spend a lot of time walking around downtown right now, really trying to get acquainted with downtown Dartmouth and really trying to understand my community and the people in it and what they think, what they feel, what they're experiencing. And I have like the most incredible conversations. And there was a gentleman, we were walking our dogs together, that I ran into on Saturday. And we started talking about the state of the city. His wife happens to work in City Hall. It was an interesting conversation. And then he asked me, like, what is it that you do? And I was like, well, I'm a perceptual architect. And he's like, well, what's that? So then I had to explain it. And I started talking about this work. And it led him to saying, well, I have my job and it's okay, but it's not really what I want to do, but I don't know what else I want to do. And I don't know where my value sits. I don't know what I have to offer that's of value. And I'm like, well, friend, my ecosystem helps you determine that, because every field in your life produces value. And it might not be immediate monetary value. He happened to work in sales. And I said, so that just because you have a relationship with someone doesn't mean it's going to produce money immediately, but the long-term effects could. There could be a material resource and it may not come from that person directly. It may be indirect. But there's value there. There's value in that relationship. Do you know how to look at the relationships in your life and understand the value that sits in there? Indirect, right? Sometimes the relationship is because they're your gym buddy and they motivate you to take care of your physical health, right? Maybe it's someone who comes to visit you and just their sheer presence makes your home a better place. It value, we don't value things correctly. And if we don't know what we're looking for and we don't even know that we should be looking, we then start to see our value in the way that it's been prescribed to us through your expertise and through your material resource and what your sweat equity produces for someone else. but that has nothing to do with your intrinsic value as a human. And so we have to learn what our value is and how to evaluate ourselves properly. That's why I call sovereign wealth an ecosystem of perception and a value recognition model. It's so that you can learn how to recognize your inherent value and look at your wheel and look at your fields and see where all your value sits and then figure out how to live that into your purpose. How to change how you participate with your time, attention, and energy. How to start bringing things back into equitable alignment. And by the end of the conversation, he was so sweet. By the end of the conversation, he was like, man, he said, I know for a fact that if I talked to my friends the way I spoke to myself, I would not have any friends at all. He's like, I just wouldn't. And I was like, well, maybe you need to start there. Maybe you need to become your own best friend and speak to yourself the way you would speak to your friends. Be able to identify quickly in yourself the value that you see in the people that are around you. You know, these are our blind spots. It's really hard for us to see that. And he was like, yeah, you're right. It's like, I never really thought of that. That's a really interesting kind of perspective shift. And then before we parted ways, he looked at me. He's like, well, if I learned anything this morning, Nicole, it's that I need a life coach. I think I need to go hire a life coach. I have some things I need to work on. And I think you just gave me the inspiration to go do that. And then we parted ways, and I'll probably never see this man again. But it was such a beautiful exchange to that quickly be able to take this work that I've done, apply it in a conversation without teaching a methodology, just showing up because I'm embodying my work, and have someone go, wow, I actually am more valuable than I thought. I have more to offer than I thought. I'm not valuing myself properly. And I need to go work on that so that I can have a better life. It's beautiful. That's how you become a tuning fork in this world, right? It's beautiful. And it took a minute to get here. It's taken me 42 years to figure this out. But yeah, this is field literacy in action. This is why I show up every week and I have these conversations, because they're highly nuanced, and if I put it all on paper, it doesn't make sense, right? It's like you see that meme of the guy, can't remember the show, where he looks crazy because everything's webbed on the wall, and he's like, "Blah!" Well, that's my brain 100% of the time, because to me, everything is constantly interconnected and working with each other. But because I can see that, I can make decisions quickly. I can see through lines very quickly, and it's available to everybody. It happens to be my superpower. It's the way I'm wired, but it's available to everybody, and it's what I want for the world. This is my little love letter and gift to the world, is for you to be able to see your inherent value, to be able to tap into your self-worth, so that when you see your value, when you feel worthy, you stop outsourcing that to everyone else. You stop outsourcing the validation to external factors. You take control of your sweat equity, and you build a wealthy life. And it's because there's no such thing as other, general, or miscellaneous. And that is what I'm going to teach the public today when I call the radio at 11 o'clock. Because again, we're just picking at symptoms. The mayor, this is what I love so much about the municipal politics, is that everything we see coming out in the audit reports and the conduct, they're just reflecting back to us the little parts of ourselves that we need to dig a little deeper into. It's all symptoms, right? And it gives us a mirror and the ability to look at ourselves and look at our life and go, oh, I actually do that. Again, finger out, three back. Comes really hard to start pointing the finger out, not doing something about it. And when you show up differently, people show up differently around you. The more light you cast and hold, the less shadow there is around you. Makes it much harder for people to hide. And this is why, again, everything starts with, can you be a good witness? Halt. Can you be brutally honest, accept where you're at, start building the loyalties to secure trust, while also knowing who you are, where you're standing, and the contracts and agreements that you're making on a regular basis based on your ability to halt, to pause, to witness what's happening. And through tiny micro adjustments, the more honest you can be. If I've learned anything in the last few weeks, is that I am able to hold a level of honesty and ask really hard questions without judgment or criticism. And I used to be very judgmental. I used to be very critical because that was just a reflection of how I felt about myself. But I'm able to hold the compassion. I'm able to hold these conversations. I'm able to question the pattern under the behavior without condemning the person. And that's a far more effective way to move through this world. But it can also be very polarizing, and it can push a lot of people away, and it can be isolating in its own way. But I do have deep faith that the more people that can do this kind of work and move from the inside out and build this trust and recognize their own value and take charge of their self-worth, the easier this is going to be. And that will become the norm. And that we can start bringing things into equitable alignment, and we don't have to wait for the world to collapse. We don't have to wait for the housing. We don't have to wait for the housing market and the financial systems and the governments. We don't have to wait for things to collapse to try and build our way out of it. We can just decide now that I don't want to participate in collapse. I don't want to participate in victim logic, in hero logic, in villain logic, in collapse logic. I want to be wealthy. I want to be healthy. I want to generate this for myself, for my children, for my grandchildren, for the generations I'll never meet. We can do that. It's within our power. It's within our control. And so we've now blown over by a few minutes. I still keep trying to keep these to an hour or less, but it's the 30th of June, 2026. We're over halfway through 2026. Tomorrow's July 1st. It's a new month. It's the summer. There's a lot happening. Go live your best life. Go enjoy your communities, enjoy your families, enjoy yourself. Pay more attention. Question how you participate. Ask if you can participate better. Remember that you're inherently wealthy, that you hold tremendous value, and that the world is here for you to learn how to be in that state. And from there, all things are possible. It's not magical, it's not mystical, it's actually quite structural. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. And I will see you same time, same place next week.